Presidency spokesperson Vincent Magwenya says President Cyril Ramaphosa has withdrawn changes to the Ministerial Handbook. It follows a public outcry after it emerged that ministers would be exempt from paying water and lights, at least at their official residences. Our reporter Govan Whittles was one of those who attended that briefing at the Union Buildings earlier on in the day. Govan, good evening to you. Thanks for coming into studio to speak about this. Firstly, there's been a big outcry from the media over a number of years over the lack of engagement out of the presidency, in particular briefings of this nature where journalists have the opportunity of asking the president himself or his spokesperson about crucial matters that the country is dealing with. So before we get into what came out of the briefing, what has happened?
Well, it certainly was something that we weren't expecting. In fact, got a late media advisory on Monday from the president's spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, and essentially this is meant to bolster the engagement between the presidency and journalists following the request for more direct question and answer sessions specifically with the president. Vincent Magwenya taking the time to arrange this and answer topical issues, also making the announcement about the Ministerial Handbook, but noting that he had promised this to the president, and also noting that he had promised a one-on-one engagement between the president and journalists every quarter, and says he knows that it's October now, so they've missed the last deadline for the quarter. He promises he'll bring the president next time, but essentially saying that today's engagement is what they would like to see going forward and is the type of relationship they hope to build with the president going forward. Also encouraging to get this commentary from the president's spokesperson. Remember, there was quite a lull in people speaking for the president, particularly on broadcast media, following the suspension of Kusela Diko, and then the taking up of the appointment on an acting basis by Tyrone Seal, and then now the appointment of Vincent Magwenya as the permanent presidential spokesperson. So we can expect much more of this going forward.
Govan, let's get into then some of the matters that were quite prominent in that briefing. No surprises that the issue of ministers and those benefits that the president was accused of having signed into as an amendment, in particular when it concerns the payment of the utilities at the official residence. The presidency saying that there wasn't a secret amendment and that there wasn't an intention to hide anything. And yet, what has now been withdrawn was not available online. In fact, it wasn't even there when we look at the actual print of the 2022 Ministerial Handbook. So what do they say happened?
Well, firstly, he was responding to the claim that this was done in secret, saying that there were a few headlines around the changes. Therefore, the president's spokesperson denying that they tried to hide the so-called presidential perks which were added to the Ministerial Handbook. So essentially, this was signed in May 2022, and since May, the ministers have not been paying water or electricity. They've been able to buy vehicles for 800,000 Rand, where it was 700,000 Rand before, and they've been able to appoint 5 more staff to assist them. These are people that generally would help the ministers prepare for interviews, administrative staff, make sure the diary is lined up for the day. And that's what the president has withdrawn. And he's withdrawn it following what they say is noted public response to it. It's, I suppose, a euphemism for saying the public outrage over the fact that these ministers weren't paying water and lights, particularly as South Africans face load shedding and here in Gauteng water shortages. But now they say that they've done this with the view of reviewing the entire Ministerial Handbook. So let's take a look at what the president's spokesperson had to say about this and exactly why they did it.
President Ramaphosa has ordered the withdrawal process of the presidential minute on the executive members' guide, commonly known as the Ministerial Handbook for 2022. The withdrawal will give effect to the 2019 version of the executive guide pending a review. President Ramaphosa acknowledges and appreciates the public sentiments on the matter. However, the impression created that the amendments were conducted in secrecy and to avoid public scrutiny is false.
Well, I guess one of the big questions then, Govan, going forward is, if in fact it wasn't meant to be done in secret, why was it not available in the documents that are publicly available, especially what is supposed to be the updated Ministerial Handbook that was published in April, and this amendment coming up in May. But we'll leave that particular issue there for now. There's also the big question around the Zondo Commission of Inquiry's report, and in particular the ministers that have been implicated in that report. What is the Presidency saying about this?
So what's interesting is the intention to review the Zondo Report stated by at least the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Govan Whittles, following his implication in the report over those security upgrades by Bosasa at his home. And the Minister said this soon after the report dealing with that matter had been released, or its findings at least. So his intention to review is long-standing, and since then the expectation had been that he would file the papers in the High Court. That hasn't happened. We try to push the presidential spokesperson on what the President's view is on the delay in actually filing this review and what it means for consequence management. One of the interesting parts of his answers is that it wouldn't at all affect the President's planned implementation of the report and the document he intends to submit to Parliament next week, detailing how he plans to implement it. But Vincent Magwenya acknowledging that the President does want the ministers who are implicated to file a review as soon as possible. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
The intention was to try and find some form of balance between what ministers could afford to pay versus some of the costs that they have. Pretty much all of them have their own private residences, and by virtue of being ministers, they then inherit 2 official residences. So now you have a scenario where you have a cost for 3 homes. Be that as it may, we can no longer further debate that outcry and the merits of that outcry, except to say, let's accept what the public has given us as a message, and let's conduct a necessary review that will ensure that the next version of the guide is aligned to not only public's expectations, but to the realities that many South Africans face. I don't think it's in their interest to take as long as they want. They will want to file those reviews as soon as possible. The President will want them to file those reviews as soon as possible so that those matters can be concluded as speedily as possible. So it's not a case of just an indefinite period with no end in sight. It will have to have some end in sight in some way. However, he will respect that process nonetheless.
All right, so Govan, just before I let you go, was there a particular date about when next we can expect a briefing of this nature?
It does appear to be urgent on the agenda, especially since a concession has been made that it's overdue. So we are expecting it as soon as possible, although should be noted the President is currently in the middle of a packed diary which will include a presidential imbizo at the end of the week. And thereafter, I would be preparing to meet King Charles in Britain. So we'd hope to get that engagement before he heads off to the UK. And we'll certainly keep pressing the presidential spokesperson for it.
All right, Govan Whittles, we'll leave it there for tonight. And of course, Govan was our reporter on that story at the Union Buildings.